There's nothing like snook hook sets at dawn or catching a tarpon in the moonlight. Find your next fishing trip made easy on fishingbooker.com and experience the magic of the Sunshine State or any other destination on your fishing bucket list. Book a blue water adventure in search of sailfish or go snapper fishing with the kids. With over 6,000 captains and trips to choose from, planning your next one just got a whole lot easier. Download the Fishing Booker app on the Google Play or App Store, or visit them online at fishingbooker.com to book your trip today. I'm sure a lot of you guys remember the old ceremonial hunting tradition of eating the heart out of the first animal you kill. Meat from those organs are among the most nutrient-rich foods on the planet. You can get those same benefits your ancestors craved via convenient daily capsules from Heart and Soil. Find out more at heartandsoil.co. And remember, use code MeatEater for 10% off your purchase.
Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast, your home for deer hunting news, stories, and strategies. And now, your host, Mark Kenyon.
Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast. I'm your host, Mark Kenyon, and this is episode number 396. And today on the show, I'm joined by MeatEater's Janis Putelis to analyze his 2020 Wisconsin whitetail bow hunt and to explore ways that all of us can better learn from our hunts and unfilled tags. All right, welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast, brought to you by Onyx. And today on the show, we've got Janis Putelis with me. And most of you probably know Janis. He's a producer and host and do-it-all extraordinaire over at MeatEater and a damn good hunter. But most of that hunting over the last 2 decades has happened out west for big game animals other than whitetails. But this year, his whitetail interest was rekindled as he planned a return trip to a property in Wisconsin that he grew up gun hunting. Now, Janis and I talked a lot leading into this hunt about all sorts of different ideas and strategies. He was listening to Wired Hunt podcast, and he was pretty pumped to get out there and try a bunch of this crazy whitetail stuff that we talk about here, but which he never really had a chance to try back when he was hunting whitetails in his teenage days. So, very interesting to see a really experienced Western hunter like this come back to the Midwest and try to explore this different aspect of hunting. And that hunt, it happened last month. Spoiler alert, he did not fill his tag, but he had a great experience and some interesting learning experiences. So today what I want to do was get Janis on the show to debrief on what happened on that hunt, the challenges he's faced, what went well, what he struggled with, trying to take his whitetail game to this new level, and maybe what he was able to learn from all of this too. And that last aspect, that's, I think, what I'm the very most interested in, which is how can Janis or you and I better learn from a quote-unquote failed hunt, or really any hunt for that matter. How can we learn from a hunt? How can we learn from a hunting season? I know that for some of you listening, maybe that's not something you're worried about. For you, maybe hunting is just an opportunity to relax and have a good time, and you don't want to overthink things in that kind of way. You just want to enjoy it. And that is absolutely fine and dandy and great. I think you're going to enjoy Janis' story just for the sake of a good hunting story. But I also know that there's a lot of you out there like me who are driven to just go deeper and deeper into this thing and constantly find ways to fine-tune what you're doing and take your hunting experience to the next level. And so for those of you out there like that, I want to spend some time here today talking about this larger idea of how do we learn from a hunt? You know, it's something we talk about on this podcast a lot, but usually pretty generically. You know, something. You got to learn from your experiences, or yada, yada, yada. As long as you learn from a hunt, it wasn't a failure. You've heard me say that kind of stuff, or you heard Dan say that kind of stuff. But, how do you actually do that? And is it really just that easy as, going out there hunting, screwing things up, or doing something, then saying, well, I learned this lesson? I don't think it is that easy, at least from my experience. I think there's more to it than that, or at least there can be more to it if we have a little bit of a more thoughtful way of trying to learn from these things. So over the past year or so, I've been doing a lot of reading and studying about this. In particular, studying decision making and how to analyze your decisions and how do you learn from your outcomes? How do you come to some kind of clear takeaway that you can, move forward from? I know this is some nerdy stuff, and it's usually written about and thought about in the context of something like business or war or poker or other strategy-based activities. But I just see so many parallels to hunting, especially whitetail hunting, because whitetail hunting, right, as many of you guys know, it's very strategy focused. Once you understand the basics of deer biology and behavior and some kind of standard foundational elements of hunting strategy, from there it all comes down to decision making, right? What am I going to do today based on all the stuff I know? Do I sit there or there? Do I hunt today or tomorrow? Do I, take this risky move or not? And then learning from all those things. So here we are in December, and for a lot of us, probably most of us, there's a bunch of hunts in our rear view mirror. A bunch of decisions have been made, and some turned out well, some maybe not so well. And the question now is, at least for me, is how do we learn from that? What do we do different next time? What do we do the same next time? What should we be thinking about as we plan our next hunt or our next sit? Or what the hell we're going to do in 2021? I'm going to talk about some of these things with Janis, and I want to hear his thoughts. But before that, I want to lay out some ideas that I want all of us to keep in mind as we listen to Janis, and that I'm hoping that you can try to put into action for yourself when all this is over. So as I mentioned, I've been doing a bunch of reading on this. A couple of the most interesting books on this topic were written by a woman named Annie Duke, and she's a former professional poker player who's then applied a bunch of the decision-making strategies and analyses from poker and taking all that and apply it to the business world and other places. So she's got some really interesting ideas. I'm going to share some quotes and ideas from her books for reference if you do want to take a look at these. The books are one titled Thinking in Bets, Making Smarter Decisions When You Don't Have All the Facts, and then secondly, How to Decide, Simple Tools for Making Better Decisions. Some good books here. I definitely recommend them. So let's get into a couple ideas here. I think it's fair to say that one of the keys to getting better after an unfilled tag or a failed hunt, right? It's learning from that. And if that's the case, we need to understand what can help us learn from an experience or a hunt and what keeps us from doing that. And there's a couple things that Annie talks a lot about in these books that keep us from learning, keep us from being able to accurately judge our decisions. And they're something that are referred to as cognitive biases. And basically cognitive bias is a fancy word for a mental shortcut that our brains make to kind of make life easier. They're ways that the brain kind of jumps to assumptions that oftentimes they're right, but sometimes they're not, and they can lead to mistakes in our thinking. The first one of these is something you've heard me mention a few times this season as I've been thinking about these things. It's called resulting. And resulting, I'll quote the definition here from the book, is the tendency to look at whether a result was good or bad to figure out whether a decision was good or bad. So, in other words, it makes you think you know something about the quality of decision because you know of the outcome. So, because this bad thing happened, my decision was bad. Or because this good thing happened, my decision was good. But sometimes that's not the case. So, for example, let's say I make a decision to hunt a certain tree based off a bunch of stuff. Trail cam pics, wind direction, an observation, so on. But then the hunt progresses, and I see the buck I was targeting, and he moved 100 yards away. Now, given that result, it would be easy for me to say, well, that was a bad decision to hunt from this tree because the buck was 100 yards away and I didn't kill him. So bad decision because of that bad outcome. But maybe it was a damn good decision based off of everything I knew, but it was just outside factors or luck that influenced where that buck was and kept the outcome from matching that good decision, right? There was a whole bunch of different potential outcomes, even though it might have been a really good decision to be there based off what I knew. If we give into this tendency to focus just on that result and let the result dictate how we judge our decisions, aka resulting, it skews our ability to learn from those experiences. Now here's another one of these tendencies that we humans have that mess up our ability to learn, and it's called hindsight bias. And this is the tendency to believe that an event, after it occurs, was predictable or inevitable, right? Something happens, and then after it happened, we will sometimes say, well, of course it happened. It's that whole hindsight's 2020 kind of thing. So, for example, we decide to go sit the corner oak tree on a hunch, and a big buck comes rolling through, and you get a shot. And after that happens, you look back on it, and the power of hindsight bias will make a lot of us jump to the conclusion that, yeah, of course it happened. I sat there because, there was two trails that came together, and yeah, it worked out just like I planned it. I knew this was going to be where it would happen, right? I know you all have a buddy who will tell you the story, and man, just like I called it, I knew it was going to happen. But in reality, yeah, it did happen, but there were plenty of other outcomes that were possible. This time it panned out, but if we're being honest with ourselves, and if we honestly think through our decision process and how we executed on it, was it really just right? Or are we maybe giving ourselves a little bit too much credit sometimes? And if we do that too often, if we start patting ourselves on the back too often, if we look at things and say, well, of course that happened that way, sometimes that's going to start impacting our future decisions too. Now, the same thing can be said on the flip side, when the outcomes didn't go our way, and you see the buck traveling off in the distance, and you tell yourself, dang it, I should have known that. Of course he'd be over there. But really, this hindsight bias is something we've got to watch out for. So these two little mental shortcuts resulting in hindsight bias, these things can mess with our ability to learn from experiences. They can keep us from analyzing a hunt clearly or learning from a decision clearly. So here are two things to think about that can help us battle that, I guess. And I'm gonna read two quotes here from one of these Annie Duke books that I think are pretty key here. Number one, what makes a decision great is not that it has a great outcome. A great decision is the result of a good process. So thinking about the process, not the outcome, but the process. And then number two, to assess the quality of a decision and to learn from experience, you need to evaluate your state of mind honestly and recall what was knowable and what was not knowable as accurately as possible. So, one of the keys to determining decision quality or, learning something from a hunt or an experience is to think more about the decision process than the actual outcome. Clearly remembering and identifying what did I know as I was trying to make that decision? What did I know? What did I not know? What couldn't I have known? And being able to separate those two things from, the future and from what the actual outcome was. And then you got to think about, okay, this is what I knew. This is what I couldn't have known. Now, what was the whole process? Given what I knew, now that I've had time to thoroughly think it through, did I use that information to put myself in the right position? And then did I execute on that decision and that idea the way that it could have? Did I just not have enough information? Or did I have the right information, but I just got lazy or tired or sloppy? This step here, this idea of reflecting back on your hunts and thinking through not just the outcomes of your time, but the process you took, I think that is what's actually going to help us get better. And here's the real kicker, though, and a really important point that I think Annie makes, and it's so true when it comes to hunting. She says, a lot of experience can be an excellent teacher, but a single experience, not so much. Think about that. Let me say that again. A lot of experience can be an excellent teacher, but a single experience, not so much. So one single hunt, one single decision, one single outcome, that shit can fool you. Sometimes things happen because you made a great decision, but sometimes things happen because of good luck, or on the flip side, because of bad luck. If we focus too much on any one single data point or one single experience, we're at risk of being fooled by randomness. But if on the flip side, we focus on the entirety of our experiences or the averages, the trends, the overall sum of our progress, I think that's when we can start getting a more clear and honest picture of what's happening and how our changes in process are either helping or hurting us. So here's what I want you guys to try to do if you're willing to play along with me here a little bit. While you listen to Janis and I break down his hunt, don't just listen to his story, but also try to listen for examples of this resulting or listen for examples of hindsight bias. As Janis is discussing what he's doing, listen to his decision-making process and how he interpreted the outcomes he saw. And use this as a little bit of a trial run for your own future reflections. I didn't tell Janis about any of this kind of stuff leading up to it. So he's just recounting what happened and questioning his decisions and all that just naturally. And it's a fun story on its own. But I think it's interesting to hear how he worked all of this and then think about that through the lens of what I just told you. These tools, these biases to watch out for, and these ways to think through things a little bit differently. So when you're done listening to the story, the next time you've got a long car ride, or maybe on your next morning run or during a long shower, try to apply a little bit of this thinking to your own hunting season, or maybe your most recent hunting trip. Think through the decisions you made and the outcomes that came from those, and then the conclusions you drew from. Push yourself to consider whether or not resulting or hindsight bias might have clouded your vision a little bit. Try to pick apart that process and be honest about it. Be honest about what you could have known in the moment and what you couldn't have. Try to remove the stuff that you discovered later. Like, yeah, the big buck jumped the string and you missed him. Or yeah, the big buck came out over here. Or yeah, there was 15 neighbors hunting on the other property, and that stuff after your decisions. But try to think about, what did you know in the moment when you were deciding what to do and when you were actually doing it. And also then think about not just one single moment or experience or decision, but the sum of those experiences. So we're not going to be fooled by one single data point. We're not going to be fooled by randomness. We're going to look at the sum of the whole. And then after all that thinking and reflecting and picking things apart a little bit, I think then you can have some useful, clear takeaways. And my one thought on that is to try to focus your takeaways to just maybe one or two things. At least for me, it can be easy to, look back on my hunt. Let's say, look back on my hunt for Tran, right? You've heard me talk about that and reflect on that. And I could sit here and I could list off like 3, 4, 5, 6 different things that I learned from this hunt, and that maybe, I want to incorporate into future hunts, or that I want to change, some different takeaways, some lessons learned. If you do that, though, it's really easy to get overwhelmed by all that, and then none of it stick. On the flip side, if you can focus on just one or two things and say, okay, from this hunt or this season, these are my 2 big takeaways. These are the 2 things I want to get better at, or that I want to do different, or that I have to remember for next time around. If you can have it focused there, you got a much better chance of actually being able to take action on them and to actually do something with. It's like a New Year's resolution, right? If you've got 15 New Year's resolutions, you're not going to keep any of them. But if you got one of them and it's achievable and actionable and clear, then you got a chance. So that's my homework for you, I guess. I know you sure as hell didn't want homework from me, so sorry about that. But if you're game for this, try to come up with a couple things. Keep it tight, keep it actionable, keep it achievable, and write it down. And maybe this is something that's best done at the end of the year when your whole hunting season's done, but maybe not. Write down these couple things, and leading into 2021, you've got something to work with. You've been able to take a clear look at what you did. You're able to have a clear, accurate, and honest understanding of your process, and have a few actionable items to think about or to move on. So there you go. It's a lot to think about there, I realize. Maybe I lost a couple of you, but for those of you that are still here with me, I think and I hope that this is going to be a helpful framework for us to have in place as we dive into this conversation with Janis. So there you go. I think enough of me rambling. Let's just get into Janis' story. Think about these things. Enjoy this. And I hope you find it helpful. All right. With me on the line now is my buddy Janis Putelis. Yanni, thanks for joining me here on the show.
No, thanks for taking the time to make me a better whitetail hunter, Mark.
Well, I got to tell you, it's been fun seeing you kind of get re-excited about whitetails this year and getting these random text messages and phone calls from you, picking my brain about this thing or that, because I'm not used to that from you. and I'm digging it, and I'm hoping you're going to keep on the whitetail train. So, are you feeling like it's going to continue, or was this a one and done?
No, for sure. As long as when I say they, that the powers that be, if I did a good enough job with my whitetail hunt this year and made some good, entertaining content, then hopefully they will let me do it again next year. And I think I plan on being back on the same ground for. Well, that's something we can talk about. I don't know if it'll be the same dates, but roughly during somewhere in that 3-week peak whitetail period, I'd like to be back hanging off out of a tree for a solid week or so, for sure.
So what I wanted to do here was basically take a conversation I think you and I wanted to have anyways, which was hearing about how your hunt went and kind of dissecting and maybe doing almost an autopsy of the experience. What were you thinking leading up to it? What happened during the hunt itself? Were there things you could have done differently? Were there things you did right? I kind of want to walk through the whole hunt, your whole experience, kind of diving back into the whitetail thing after you've been somewhat removed from it over the past couple decades, and seeing if not only can you learn something from this hunt, but maybe there's some opportunities to help everybody else learn how to kind of dissect their own experiences. Because this is something I'm always trying to do myself. And you've heard some of my past podcasts, Yanni. You hear me lots of times trying to analyze what I was thinking in a given moment, or did I make the right decision here? Should I have done something differently? And at least for me, I kind of geek out about this constant fine-tuning and polishing of what I'm trying to do. And I hope that's something that people can take away from this and do themselves. So this seems like a perfect case study. And then the goal would hopefully be that you come out of this having found something valuable too. So are you game for that, for me to just start picking it away at everything you did and see what we can find?
Oh yeah, please. Like I said before we started recording, I think I'm going to get more out of this than your listeners. But hopefully it's of equal value to both them and me. But yeah, man, have at it.
Well, let's set it up a little bit, because right, you grew up having done some whitetail hunting, and then you headed out west and started chasing all sorts of other things. Can you just lay the groundwork as far as what those early whitetail experiences were? Like, what did you have coming into this from your past?
Yeah, so, I started hunting whitetails. I don't know. I probably started sitting in the blind with my dad at 10 or so, and I think I could hunt at 12. I can't remember which state was which. What is it in Michigan now, 12 or 14?
It's removed. Now, if you've got a mentor with you, you can start hunting super young. But it used to be, I think, 13 with a bow. Or 13, I don't know, 12 with a bow, 13 with a gun, something like that.
Yeah. Anywho, right about that age, I started, carrying a gun. A few years later, got a bow, started shooting a bow a little bit. And, man, it's hard to put an exact number on it, but there was a couple of falls before I left, because I left Michigan when I was 18, I believe, to move out to Colorado. So there was probably 2 or 3 falls there where, I probably spent a dozen days or, hunts in a tree stand on my own with the bow. Took a few shots, never killed one. Over the years, I don't know, killed probably 10 does and a 3-4 small, basket rack Michigan special bucks. And I know in Wisconsin, I killed like a crotched horn was my first buck in Wisconsin. And I think I was probably 16-ish when I killed that. So as much as I say like I grew up whitetail hunting, I think I left right at the point in time where I could have gotten kind of real serious about it. And I know some people get more serious earlier, but for me, I think roughly at the age of 18, I probably could have started, really, focusing in on it. And I just was gone, So there's some whitetail experience, but it's definitely limited. And then over the course of the next 20 years, I would go back probably every 3 or 4 years to Wisconsin and just hunt the gun opener. And then the following 2 days, all on the same property that I hunted this year for a full 7 days. So, there's definitely some familiarity, but I think one thing I learned this week, like big time, is just how, the different levels of familiarity, right? You think you sort of know a place, and then spending a whole week there, like just pounding it, I just have a whole different view on it now. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And you and I were talking the other day about how, just going from being in a situation that you're typically in out west in Montana or Colorado or wherever, chasing elk, mule deer, all the stuff you've been doing over the last 20 years, you obviously have, developed a real level of expertise doing that stuff. But then you go back to something you did a long time ago, and it's a little bit humbling being put in a slightly different position now, right? When you headed back to Wisconsin, taking on this, hunting in a different kind of way, bow hunting during the rut, pounding it for 7 days. What was that like for you, just going from something you're super comfortable with to now back in a different type of situation and kind of, I don't know if I wanted to say I'm not sure exactly what the right word would be, but in outside of your comfort zone in a weird way, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I think mostly what I noticed there with that was that I just I lack the confidence in decision making, because even though I haven't done a lot of it, I spent a couple years ago, you and I hunted in Michigan, kind of on the same hunt. And I spent 3 or 4 days in a tree stand.
Yep.
Although I hadn't really like picked locations there. We kind of showed up, and you were like, "Yeah, go sit here." So I didn't really have to do much of the homework, but yeah, it was just like the lack of confidence. Like when I'm in the woods out here out west, I just sort of have like I know I'm maybe not making the right decision, but I have confidence in my decision, and I go and execute on it, and let the chips fall. But that week in Wisconsin this year, I was just constantly just battling in my head, like, should I stay? Should I go? Just this classic FOMO of fear of missing out of what's going on over the next ridge. And should I give it some more time, or should I not? Is it too windy to be on a ridge top? If I go off the ridge top, is the wind going to suck? So yeah, because these days with so much information out there, listening to all your podcasts and listening and watching the Hunting Public guys, reading stuff, there's just so much out there that you sort of like gain like going into it before you get your boots on the ground. You kind of have a false sense of confidence, especially when you got 20 trail cameras out and you've got 6 or more like happy to shoot kind of bucks. And then you all of a sudden you have to put it all, put the boots on the ground and make it happen. And then you realize that it's not going to be that easy as just like everybody makes it sound like on every podcast.
Yeah. So set me up with the place. This is somewhere that you have hunted in the past, but never like this. This is somewhere in Wisconsin. Kind of paint the scene a little bit for what you were heading into.
Yeah, we're up in and kind of like pretty central, like over by Eau Claire, La Crosse are kind of the two nearest bigger towns. What's interesting about this property is that it lacks any real agriculture. Like we have a couple small fields that are on the neighbors on one side of us, but other than that, it's just all big oak woods, and it's been managed, had, cuts done on it over the years. And so you have, like the poplar and maple, kind of younger thickets, here and there. But it lacks that edge habitat, that if I was going to go and like just pick a place to go hunt, I would like find a place that had a lot of edge habitat, right? Because it seems like deer like it, and it also seems like a good place to ambush deer is on those edges. And it's got a lot of topography for whitetail country. I mean, it's not quite the, whitetail country of Montana, but like it's got ridges that go 200 to 300 feet up from the bottom, and definitely has stuff that's steep enough to, that you could ski. And it's sort of just like this interconnected woven. It's either you can say that the ridges are connected or the bowls are connected, through saddles, however you want to look at it. But like a lot of ups and downs, a lot of little finger ridges popping off the main ridges. It's a place where when you're taking the ridge out, before onyx, there's a lot of times where if you, take the finger ridge down too early and don't walk the extra 50 or 75 yards to stay on the main ridge, you end up going into a hellhole and then having to walk around another ridge versus taking the easy way home. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It can just, and it all looks the same. We have it so easy for navigating out west. With big mountains, it's just easy to, know which way is downhill and which way to go. And when you get into, not that this terrain is flatter, but it's just more covered in vegetation, I guess. So it's harder to just see, around you and just kind of go, oh yeah, there's the, sun in the south or whatever. So anyways, yeah, big ridges, big bowls, all hardwoods. And what else I want to say about it?
Is there anyone hunting it other than you?
I mean, there's a pretty good group of guys that all hunt it over rifle season. And this year, it's in the last couple of years, some of the older fellows have retired. So this year they actually put in 2 weekends over rifle season. But otherwise, no, nobody really hunting it for bow season. I mean, every now and then, someone might come and put a day or two in, but it's fairly unmolested.
Okay. So then what?
About 400 acres is about what I had access to.
Nice. So then what was the game, or what was the prep work that you put into it leading up to the hunt? Were you able to come out and scout or do anything in the spring or summer? Or was this, your dad hung some cameras and then you came right out during the actual hunt? Yeah.
So I didn't get to make it out there. I tried, thought about it. In retrospect, I think there's some things I could have done. I don't know if I would have done these things that I would now do with a trip in the summertime, but yeah, so I didn't make it. So really, I just poured over, the topography layer on Onyx probably more than anything as far as like digital scouting goes, and just really try to just from what I know from like general deer movement on this property, and then really just try to fine tune it and look and like pick my saddles. Cause like everybody knows, right? Like ridge country, it just seems like saddles, are places where deer travel, So I just really try to bear down on those and figure out, where I should try and, set a stand up. Now my dad did hang, I don't know, approximately 20 cameras. I think we had like 8 of the Moultrie cell cameras, and then a dozen or so of just the standard cameras. He did most of the work on the ground. I kept asking him to find me like the thickest bedding cover, and it was something that just never really materialized out of him. I've come to realize that my dad at 70, I can have a long to-do list, and he's only got so much energy, what I mean? So like where you and I could go and cover 7 miles and pretty much cover the whole place and be like, all right, here's the, 4 main really thick looking bedding areas, that took all summer and more to get out of him. So he did preset, I think 6 or 7 tree stands for himself, which I wasn't too worried about. I mean, I helped him pick locations. And again, we used just historical, data, and then just where we had seen a lot of activity, from the cameras. And then, he picked whatever it was, 6 or 7 spots to set up his tree stand. The guys from River's Edge actually came out and helped him, just like they helped you on the back 40 to set up the stand. So that was super nice of them.
Yeah, huge help with the assembly of some of those things, that's for sure.
For sure, it takes some time. So that was it, man. I wouldn't really call it a lot of like prep work. I was counting on, having an inventory idea of what we had with the cameras and knowing what was there and what mostly just so I would know, like, oh, okay, like there are no big bucks. Should just shoot the first basket 6 you run into, or like, oh no, there are enough like what looked to be 3 to 4 year old deer that I could hold out and try to get a shot at one of them, you know?
Yeah. So walk me through where your dad ended up putting some of these trail cameras. I know you and I had some discussions through the summer, but what ended up being the plan for where those were placed to get you that inventory?
Well, what happened with the cell cameras, we quickly realized that you can't just put those anywhere, you know, if you don't have the best coverage, right? And it definitely seemed like we just had to be up on the you could be like halfway up a hill and get decent, you know, reception, but if you had them on the ridge top, they were going to be working the best. So we basically did, you know, what from what he could tell in the moment, you know, and again, he was setting them in the summertime. So it's really hard to set in the summertime when the woods don't look like they're going to look, you know, come October or November, you know. But I had a couple spots where, like, historically I knew there was a bunch of scrapes. He would set them there. Sometimes he just, like, you know, was walking and just, you know, was like, all right, here's 2 trails, like, you know, come across this saddle. I'm going to put one here. Like I said, a lot of them we put in locations that we wanted, but we ended up having to move them. We definitely put a couple down where we do have that little bit of edge habitat where like our woods abut the neighbors' agriculture, and he had beans and corn. And then otherwise, yeah, just like, you know, I kept telling him, just try to, you know, when you're walking the boundary or walking, you know, walking the road, just look for where there's a lot of tracks crossing the road, you know, and put one up there. So, yeah, I guess that was our tactic for where to set them.
And okay, walk me through then what you ended up discovering. Did you find what you were wanting to find on those cameras?
Yeah, well, what was really interesting is that early on, like for most of the summer, like I'd say like even well into October, it was as if there were no bucks living there. Like I was kind of surprised. I was like, there was like literally nothing. Especially nothing matured. And I think that sometime in September, we finally got like a 10 point. And it was like I don't know, 120, 125 inch 10 point. It was like, sweet. Like there's one, you know.
Yeah.
What was amazing is that like whatever tripped them in October when they finally started moving, and I'm guessing just had to do with the scrapes, because all of a sudden, like, we had one camera. It was funny. It wasn't just bucks. There was one camera my dad had set up on a place that he named like Mouse Meadow, and I forget the reasoning behind it, but like it's an old scrape that's been there for whatever, as long as he remembers. So he's like, yeah, I put it up on this old scrape. And I was getting to the point where I was going to tell him to yank the camera, because like literally we had 0 deer on this thing at all. And then all of a sudden something changed, and there was does, bucks, like every single day, hitting this scrape and coming down this ridge, like to this scrape. So that was very interesting. And that happened in a lot of places. Like I was telling you earlier, like I had a spot where I kept telling him, like, please, there's like a ridge where you almost kind of go through a little tunnel of like, just like real early growth, successional growth. You know, I don't know if it's pulpers, maples, whatever, that have grown in, and it's probably been 5 to 10 years. And it's kind of like you go through a tunnel almost. It's so thick on this ridge top, you know, and we've got it cut open just as a trail. And right when it pops out, you're on a kind of a 3-way where the ridges intersect, and there's always, you know, scrapes there. And I had him put one up there, and the same thing there but when he finally put it up there, that was getting towards the end of the summer, but still 2 weeks, nothing. And then all of a sudden, sometime in October, it was like scrape time, and there was just constant activity in that zone.
And
so that was one of the big things that I learned. And then obviously I learned that there were more bucks, like more shooter type bucks around than you know we had previously thought. You know,
how many do you think?
I think we had like trying not to count the neighbors, because the neighbor sent me some pictures too of bucks that we never even got pictures of. But we probably had like 2 or 3 10 points, 2 8s. We had one that we called the straight 8 because he just had these main beams that just like were out and then went just straight out in front of his nose. No more curve, no more curve up or in, just like straight out. And then we had another one that we called like the big 8, and he just had a little bit bigger frame and a main beam that like curved, and it curved up at the end. Oh, curved up so much that it would almost make him look like a 10 in some pictures, because the main beam would kind of throw you off because it kind of pointed upward. And then we had one kind of non-typical, I don't know, I'd call him a giant. We never got to see him in daylight. He was only on nighttime pictures, but it was like I don't know. He had plenty of little stickers and points, and he's a big giant buck, definitely like a, 150 plus kind of buck. So I don't know, I'd say at least 6, maybe 8 bucks that I'd be like super happy to shoot,
What did you think about, and maybe this isn't the case, I don't know how you guys did things back when you were guiding elk hunts and stuff, but was this a interesting situation going into a hunt knowing like, okay, these are the bucks that I can probably expect to see, and you sort of were setting expectations based on that? Did that feel different compared to when you head out into Colorado or the mountains of Montana or something, don't really know what's up there? Or was this not too different and you were just going to kind of set your goals as you went?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say I was like hunting particular bucks, because I quickly realized that, man, I just didn't have it dialed in enough to be like, oh yeah, the big 8 is always running this ridge, or he's been seen here a bunch, or this is his favorite travel route, and maybe this is where he beds. Like, I didn't have any really thoughts like that. So I was going out there just thinking like, okay, I'm going to just like shoot, something that looks more like he's 2, 3, 4 years old and not a 1-year-old, and there's plenty of them out there that I should have an opportunity in 7 days of hunting.
Yeah. Okay. So do you,
I mean, it was cool to know that there was like some big bucks roaming around, but I definitely wasn't like zeroing in on one of them.
What about that big giant buck though? I know that got you a little excited. Was there any part of you that when you started hunting, you were thinking, man, should I be patient these first couple days because there's this super big guy out here, or were you honestly that realistic from day one and you were thinking, he's probably not around?
Well, I will say, because like we rolled in the evening, and I didn't really have like a spot set for the morning, and one of the few spots where like I have walked it and been there enough where I literally knew like I could go in there in the dark and probably get into a tree without a lot of commotion the first morning. It was in the area where we had picked him up on camera. So like certainly the first morning I kind of was drawn, towards his little zone where we've been picking him up on camera. But man, just like, I'd say I guess I was pretty realistic then, because I just knew that I just didn't have enough like data to be like, okay, I'm going to sit here for 7 days and it's going to happen,
Yeah. Well, walk me through what you did then. Let's just hear the day by day. And I'm kind of curious from you, not only tell me what you did, but I'm also curious if you can remember like what your thought process was when you were choosing what to do, or what were the things you were struggling with? Like, did you have questions? Like, were you struggling to think, what the hell should I do on day one? That would be interesting. And then we can kind of walk through, and I might pick some of these things apart as we go.
Sure. So that was opening morning, and I want to say that I saw 2 deer, like just cutting through the woods, kind of at a quick pace, and it was hard to tell like if a buck was chasing a doe, like they were that far off, where it was just flashes, and I got my binoculars up but never really couldn't identify them. But that was all I saw all morning, and so I decided to pull out and then go to a place that's called the Oak Flat. And the Oak Flat, like, I didn't have a camera up there, but it's basically, it borders a neighbor, and the neighbor had just like in the last 2 years, I think, pretty much clear cut like a 40-acre chunk, right? And I just figured that clear cut would, for multiple reasons in my head, would be holding deer. Whether it was just young and thick, so they'd be bedding in there. Maybe there'd be some like enough sunlight getting to it where there would be some forage that they'd want to be eating on. And so I decided to go hunt this oak flat, which is on top of a ridge. And I get in there and I actually bump two does, like right when, as I'm basically on the oak flat, kind of looking for a tree to set up in. And I'm thinking, all right, that's like a decent sign, right? There's like, they were probably bedded here or they were just feeding here off this edge. I don't know, but they didn't bump too hard. They just kind of scampered off and, didn't really know what it was. So I don't know if they just barely caught a whiff of me or what, but this oak flat has, so that was like off to one side was this clear cut, but it also has like probably maybe like a 10-year-old cut on another side of the flat, like coming off this steep ridge, which is super thick. And the wind was blowing kind of out of that 10-year-old cut thick stuff up onto the oak flat. So as the oak flat's maybe, I don't know, 100 yards wide or so ish. And I just, in my head, I thought, man, if a buck comes up onto this oak flat and he's cruising and checking like a bedding area, he's going to come like closer to this thick stuff than farther away from it, because he'll just be right on top of it, trying to smell what's down in there maybe. So I set up like, if you divide it into thirds, probably a third of the way closer to like this thick edge that dropped off. And I could still see the whole oak flat, in the other directions. So, it felt good. It was a good tree. What I found interesting too is like just learning how to pick trees like quickly, when you're saddle hunting.
Yeah.
These like in this big oak forest and on like an oak flat like that, where it's like a lot of mature trees and the leaves were like gone, like you get up there and man, there is not a lot of cover, so you're like looking for ones that have a couple extra branches poking out maybe, or looking for one that is next to a white pine that, might break up your silhouette a little bit.
Yeah.
This one, actually, I did have a nice white pine next to me, kind of in my like no shooting lane, which was perfect. Well, anyways, I think I have a fork and horn buck come in maybe, I don't know, an hour before dark. I catch, I think, one of those does up and feeding again out in the clear cut that's brand new. And then like 15 minutes left to go before dark, up onto the oak flat pops up like, I think it was the straight 8. It's like nice 8-point buck. I'm like, sweet, like from whatever distance it was, less than 100 yards, I can,
nice.
With binoculars, I can be like, oh yeah, sweet, mature buck. And
where'd he come out of?
He kind of came, he was actually paralleling walking. He's kind of coming up out of a bowl, and then his path was paralleling that, the fresh new cut was on one side of him. And then the 10-year-old cut was on the other side of him.
And was he on top of the ridge or side hilling?
Well, he came straight up out of a bowl and then popped right up on top of the ridge.
Okay.
He got up there, and then for whatever reason, instead of like as soon as he popped up, taking a right like I thought he would, and then coming along that edge that would have brought him, right into like where I was hoping he would walk, and he would continue to basically scent check that super thick stuff that he'd kind of come out of it, but he'd kind of come off the edge of it. You know what I mean? Like it didn't seem like he'd come right out of the thickest part of it, just knowing what was below me. Well, when he pops up on the oak flat, my wind is, pretty much going the same direction he's traveling, right? So if he takes a right immediately, he's going to come across the wind and never catch my wind. But for whatever reason, he goes almost across the oak flat and gets like downwind, but I still have like a parallel wind. And then he takes the right and basically comes, and then you could tell he had actually turned and was going to come back across the oak flat to I don't know where he was going to go at that point. At this point, I'm just guessing. But he had made the turn, and then literally as he made the turn to come back towards me, and this is probably, I don't know, when he popped up, he was probably 60 yards, and then he stayed at roughly 60 yards, maybe 70, made that turn, and then was going to come back towards me. But at that point, he caught my wind, and that was it. It's so funny because you're watching, you're like, oh yeah, these big bucks are going to be so stupid. It's November 5th. I'll get away with everything. It's like, well, you get away with everything except for when they smell you.
Yeah. So looking on that then that night, given what you knew, if you took the fact of what he actually did, but do you feel like you were set up in about the best place you could have been given the information available, or after watching that night, did you learn something that would have changed your thought process next time around up there?
Man, it's a tough call. I sat that oak flat probably at least 3 or 4 more hunts. That's probably like the one spot that I spent the most time in because I was having, continual success there, right? Like I was at least seeing deer there, even if it wasn't like a mature buck. And the following days when I set up probably 30, 40 yards more downwind. It was interesting. We had a south wind pretty much the whole week, which
that was the hot week, wasn't it?
Yeah, very, very, very warm. I think a lot of people battled that in the upper Midwest that first week of November this year. But yeah, it was just like the south wind. So a lot of my planning in my head, when I was like looking at saddles and just like thinking about where to put stands, everything in my head was like, well, you're going to set up for a west wind because that's just going to be like more than likely what you're going to be dealing with, And so that really threw me off, was to constantly have to go in there and be like, okay, no, it's going to be south wind, And so when I set up, consequently, I was setting up more downwind, and I think every deer that pretty much came onto that flat, like I would have gotten close to getting a shot on them, but the flat's just big enough, you know what I mean, where you can't cover it all if you decide to set up like on the actual downwind side,
Yeah.
And a lot of these, like where these ridges break off and fall off, if you get right on that edge and the wind's blowing anything more than 4 or 5 miles an hour, I feel like that your wind's kind of getting blown out into, I don't know, just like the universe, as opposed to like kind of falling down the hill. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you'll blow over top of anything, right, that comes close.
Yeah, so you're almost like getting the best of both worlds, because even if something comes up the hill downwind of you, there's a really good chance that your wind's blowing over the top of them, right? So anyways, yeah, that's what I did the following sets. And I had like I forget what it was. It's like either a forked horn or maybe like a real small 6 that I messed around with. He came in, and one of those bucks that like really anxious, right? Like comes by once, didn't make it within range, so I let him get to like, just where I could barely see him, grunted at him. Then he came all the way back, went downwind of us, definitely could tell he was smelling us, and then came right back under the tree again.
Asking for trouble.
Yeah, asking for trouble. But it was early in the hunt, so I'm like, I'll let you go. It's going to get better.
Man, what about scent control? Is that something did you run the Western route, which is just play the wind and don't worry about stuff, or did you try to adopt some of the whitetail fanatic approach and do some stuff to minimize a little? What'd you do on that front?
Not too much. A couple bottles of the scent away. We're kicking around. We would spray ourselves, periodically. We did leave our hunting clothes outside. We wore rubber boots.
All right.
While we hunted, but man, being that like it's 2 of us, right? Because we're videoing it, and the fact that we were like doing some pretty serious walking. It wasn't like mega hikes, but like, a solid like 15, 20-minute hoof in the dark is definitely enough to, like, if you're not dressed properly, if you've got too many clothes on, you're going to get lathered up a little bit.
Yeah.
So, I was, and you know what? I can't tell if it helped or not, because anytime like a deer got directly downwind, it seemed like they were on to me,
Yeah. Yeah. It's really hard with a cameraman. I definitely agree with that. I feel like if I do everything just as best as I possibly can when I'm solo, I can maybe get away with it 30% of the time, 35% of the time, something like that. The rest of the time I'm getting winded, but I get away with it a few times. But when you've got another person up there with all the additional possibilities that come with that, it's really hard. Although we definitely had a few examples this year on the back 40 where we at least got deer that were confused. But I'm running things even, further than what you described, with also using ozone too, but with two guys in the tree, both of us being super serious and having it's called an ozonics machine. So it blows some ozone out there, which foils things up a little bit more. Even we had a couple times where bucks would get downwind of us and know something was up, but not enough that they boogered out of there right away. And actually that was the buck I ended up killing on the back 40. That happened on the very first night of our hunt. He got downwind and was just, I don't love it, but there's a bunch of does around and I'm more interested in that. And so it's one of those things that sometimes it can help, sometimes it doesn't. But I don't know. It's for me, I usually err on the side of I'd rather do too much than too little, but I don't know. It's tough with the cameraman, like you said. I digress, though. Another thing on this first night's hunt, you talked about getting into this oak flat and trying to pick a tree and how so many of them lack cover. Did you find yourself having to sacrifice it all on the spot you wanted to be to get cover? Because this is like a thing I'm always battling with. Do you pick the tree that is in a slightly less than ideal location, but it's got great cover and you're not going to get busted? Or do you get in the perfect location in a subpar tree where it's, a little more risky, but you're in the spot? What did you have to do in this example?
I got lucky, and there was enough good solid oaks to climb up there. And like I said, just a couple, like a little smattering of white pines. It seemed to work. And we even had, like, I think the second tree we chose for the following sits, it had like a nice V right at, the height that we were setting up, so it gave us a little bit more cover. But yeah, just in general throughout the week, you're definitely weighing that a lot, along with, I don't know if you want to get into that now, but like just the prep that goes into, picking your spot, and how much that weighs into which tree you're going to get into, because you can get into one where there's, almost zero, shooting lanes needed to cut and just a few limbs on the way up. But it's like way too open, right? But then if you go 10 yards over, to get a little bit more cover, the next tree that's, whatever. Yeah. It's just giving you more cover. All of a sudden you went from 4 shooting lanes down to 1, and it's not the best one. And then you've also got to cut, 20 limbs and make a racket going up the tree.
Yeah.
So a lot of that.
Did you find yourself erring towards one of those extremes or the other?
Man, no, not really. It's just because, again, it's like, days are short. I would sit until, never came down probably earlier than like 10:30, 11. And so if you sat till like 1, it's getting dark at whatever it was, 5:30. And so you've only got so much time left, right? So you just have to, like, if you're going to a new spot, there's not a lot of time to be walking around, and plus you don't want to walk around too much and stink the place up. And so a lot of times I was probably hasty. And that's something I thought about retrospectively too, is like what I probably could have done some nights. And I actually did it one night is I actually, because I just wasn't feeling my spot, I just got out of the tree and just kind of sort of still hunted my way up this road where I thought I might intercept something. But there's probably other times where I had like just the setup wasn't right or the wind was wrong or whatever, and I should have just gotten out of the tree and went for a walk, and went and did some still hunting and see if I could make something happen, as opposed to just sitting there and cussing the wind.
Mm-hmm. That's hard to do, though. Really hard to bail on a hunt like that.
I think it's going to lay out and it's going to get good, or you're like, the app keeps saying that it's supposed to be straight out south. Why is it blowing out of the north on me right now? That was tricky in that rich country and I think that happened to me a couple sets is where I think I was getting like a recirculating wind, maybe. Right. So it was like blowing off the top of a big ridge and then somehow like turning underneath itself and then blowing back against it, like midway, right where I was set up. And, obviously I'm like looking up this ridge, expecting these deer to come down it towards me and the wind's blowing right at it. But yeah, hindsight's 20/20.
Now, a lot of you guys are familiar with the old hunting tradition of eating, some organ, the heart or a chunk of liver off the first animal you kill. I had that when I was a little kid, and it was a big deal. Organ meats were always prized by frontier people who knew the importance of getting a lot of different minerals and nutrients. And as often is the case, those guys were onto something, because organs are among the most nutrient-rich foods on the planet. And you can get the same benefits your ancestors craved via convenient daily capsules from Heart and Soil, made exclusively from regeneratively raised, grass-fed, and finished cattle. Heart and Soil's unique freeze-drying process means all those important nutrients are trapped in, ensuring you experience every one of the benefits of nature's superfood in a clean, convenient, taste-free capsule. Find out more at heartandsoil.co. And make sure to use code MeatEater for 10% off your purchase. That's heartandsoil.co. Use the code MeatEater. There's nothing like snook hook sets at dawn or catching a tarpon in the moonlight. Find your next fishing trip made easy on fishingbooker.com and experience the magic of the Sunshine State or any other destination on your fishing bucket list. Book a blue water adventure in search of sailfish or go snapper fishing with the kids. With over 6,000 captains and trips to choose from, planning your next one just got a whole lot easier. Download the Fishing Booker app on the Google Play or App Store, or visit them online at fishingbooker.com to book your trip today.
You just described all this prep and work it takes to get up in these trees and moving around and whatnot. This is the first time, this season at least, has been the first year that you've tried using a saddle extensively like this and been really mobile. Elevated, hunting from new places, hanging sticks up and down, climbing up and down every hunt. What was that like for you and your preparation leading up to it? I know you were, practicing in Montana and you did some hunts out there. Just, I'm kind of curious where your head's at, and now having done it, used it over the course of a good rut hunt now. What kind of prep did you need to make it work? And then when the hunt actually happened, did you feel like you were ready for that? How did it go?
Yeah, I shot a lot out of it, but I had it set up to where I could just like step up onto a tree and onto the platform and clip in, and shoot. So I felt like I did my homework there. I did my prep and I was ready to shoot out of it. And the way I have it set up at my house, because that doesn't make it sound like I'm getting much of an angle, but I've got a very steep embankment kind of gully at my house. So I would climb a tree that's at the top of it, just like, and get 2 feet off the ground and then shoot down that slope, so I could shoot these like 20-yard shots that it would be as if though you were like 30 feet up in a tree. Right. So very like steep angles, and so I got all that practice in, and I've got a full size deer target. They'll kind of let me see, what those arrows impact like, and because I think a lot of that changes too. I wasn't used to that, is where you actually might have to aim a little bit higher on that animal if you want to strike center of the vitals, because if you just hit the 10 ring, but you're shooting from a 20 feet high in a tree, you're probably just going to hit one lung and go underneath the second lung,
Yeah, you got to think about that exit.
But otherwise, I probably could have done more, just like try to get in more hunts, just like actually climbing the trees. But I went with I was using those Timber Ninja, the carbon fiber sticks.
Yep.
And I went with the ropes. They initially had sent me the buckles, and then I saw that it seemed like everybody was just running ropes, and you can just use that very simple cow hitch. And so I just went and bought some, I think it was like 6 mil static rope, and put on some chunks. And what I learned there is that I think I cut them all at 7 feet. Next year I will have probably, and I was running 4 sticks. Next year I'll probably run 3 of them at 7 feet, or maybe 3 of them at 6 feet, and then have one that has maybe 10 feet on it. Because a lot of these oaks, that very first step that you attach, I couldn't even get my arms around it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so if you don't have enough cord to get around that sucker, you're going to be SOL, and you got to go pick a different tree, even if that's in the right spot.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, man, I mean, it's definitely a little bit of a workout, especially the farther apart you spread your sticks. It takes some effort, but overall, man, I enjoyed it. It's definitely it's sweet to just have the freedom, to go anywhere, and any kind of work that you might have, getting up and down trees. I think it's outweighed by the benefit of just being able to set up anywhere you want, you know?
Was there any aha moment for you as you started doing it more and more, where you had something click with that process that made it easier, or that helped you become more efficient? I don't know. Was there any little trick to your system that ended up making things start flowing more smoothly?
Man, again, it's you kind of, as you know, we're kind of picking trees and making sets for 2 people, not just one. But I know that just as the week went on, I was much easier and quicker able to visualize, where do I want my platform? What is my 3 o'clock that I'm not going to that 3 o'clock is the angle or the direction off the clock that you are least likely wanting to take a shot, right? And sort of visualizing that and setting the sticks up and climbing the tree, so that when you get up there, you put your, platform exactly where it needs to be, and you get in there, and you don't get up there and go, oh no, I totally I'm off by 90 degrees. And where this main trail is not my best shot angle, or my shot position. So, just visualizing that, started to come together, and that was smart. Knowing just the height of where you want to put that first step. My steps had those aiders, and I could pretty much take a step, and the top of it, I would pin it to the tree with my forehead and run it around, and then pull my aider down. And with the fact that it would slack a little bit, the slack would come out, when you step on it. That would sort of put it at the right height for me to get my boot into that aider and start climbing, Now
you're a decent bit taller than Chris, who's your cameraman. Was he able to get up the steps you're hanging, or did he have the same struggle that my cameraman sometimes has with my long-legged steps?
Nah, he was fine. I would probably even because what I would do is, when you get the first one up and you're like, oh, that's not bad, and it just would seem as though I wouldn't be as confident setting the next steps as far as part and using the aider to the maximum advantage as I could.
Right.
And again, in just these woods that I'm hunting, I feel like getting high is going to be key, both for wind and just for not being detected. Because just so many times I would just imagine I would look through the woods and 70 yards down a ridge, and be if I was sitting in that tree right now, what would I look like? And then you just imagine that, and you're there's no cover. like, sure, there's some branches and stuff sticking around, but like, unless you're like tucked in behind the trunk of the tree, you're like sticking out. You know what I mean? So you can just not move, and try to blend in. But like, if you're moving around in that open canopy, boy, I think getting high is important. So next year I'll be trying to like, get the max distance with those steps and get up a little bit higher.
Yeah.
Probably 20 feet, on average. And we got comfortable there, but when you're not used to that, and even though I shot hanging out of that saddle all summer, it's just like, it's a different feeling when you're hanging at 20.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Two things on that note. One, you talked about how it was a struggle sometimes being able to getting your sticks, the straps around those bigger tree trunks at the beginning of a tree at the bottom. I've experienced the same thing. And so what I started doing this year, especially because this year I took my mobile hunting to a different level too. I was moving almost every day, bouncing all over the place. And because of that, what I ended up doing was bringing 2 screw-in steps with me as well. So I would have 3 sticks and then 2 screw-ins that I would just stick in a pocket on my backpack. So if I ever, it ended up being very lightweight and not cumbersome at all. And throwing 2 screw-ins into a tree is fast and easy. And that would get me past the really fat part of a trunk. So then I could be 5 feet up now or whatever with just 2 quick screw-ins that I do from the ground. And then once I got that high up, then the straps would fit around really easily. So I essentially had the height of an extra stick in, something that just fit right into my pocket. I wouldn't want to do that with 15 screw-ins and do the whole thing. That's a pain in the butt. But just 2 of them, it was a nice little trick to use in certain situations. Yeah.
On the stick and kind of back to scent, we had a doe one morning, and I don't know if it totally messed up my whole morning hunt. It might have played into it. There's no way to tell because I can't tell one doe from another, unless she's got like a one white eye and one black eye or something. But she came in right as she was supposed to, cutting across this saddle. And she gets right underneath us. I mean, literally underneath us. It wasn't a strong wind. Now I think it was only forecast to be like 2 or 3, right? But it's blown enough where I'm like, I don't think my scent's dropping straight down. But she gets next to our tree and catches something. Did she catch us like when we walked in? Was that what she was smelling, or was she smelling my steps on the tree?
I would say both. It's really hard for them not to pick up your ground scent, but then also imagine, whatever was on your boots and your bare hands or your gloved hands. I'm sure there was some scent on that, as you're going up those steps. And then where were you putting your sticks? Were those in the house or were those in the bed of the truck? That could be a thing too. So I would guess a combination of both probably.
Right.
I have wondered about that too. I keep my sticks and straps outside all the time, or at least in a barn or garage. But I have wondered, I know you laughed at me when I was spraying down trail cameras last fall, right? Because I was touching those with my bare hands. But I have seen so many times where if I am not wearing gloves and I touch something or I walk through a brushy, grassy field, and then later in the day, I'll see a deer walk through there. And when they hit that trail or where they hit where I grabbed a branch and got lazy and didn't, and I wasn't careful about it, they can pick up on that stuff so fast. And if it's the wrong doe, and it's the doe, there's a buck behind or something, well, it could ruin everything, that one little thing. So I constantly am trying to find these little errors like that I can fix next time. So I'm trying to make sure I'm wearing fully gloved hands when I'm walking in so I don't have to grab and push a branch out of the way that maybe a buck will walk by and smell, or those little tiny things can sometimes make the big difference. So like you said, you don't know if that made a difference in the long run, but it could have.
Yeah. Well, so what happens is like she runs off kind of the same way she came. And then like, I don't know, it was a while later, hour, maybe more later, down off the saddle in this bottom below me, maybe 80 to 100 yards, like mega crashing and rutting chasing activity, right? And like the comment or like the sort of like the path of least resistance out of this bottom would be up through this saddle that I'm set up in. Well, like I get bits and pieces of deer running around there, and I finally catch a glimpse of this buck, and it's probably the biggest buck that is the very last morning of the hunt, the biggest buck that I've had in my binoculars the whole hunt. I'm like, wow, like look at that, like there's a mature one. And they run around down there for a little while, and we're far enough away that like I wasn't worried that like they were picking up on us. But eventually, when they're done doing their little thing in that bottom, the doe goes not directly away from us, but definitely like just climbs up and out of this bottom and goes to a high ridge, like away from us and not towards us at all. Now, I don't know if it was the same doe and if her experience from 2 hours earlier, like affected that decision in that moment, but it's in the back of my head that it could have been.
Yeah, I hear you there. That's one of those things. You never know what little, like it's the butterfly effect. They say like one little butterfly's wings could change everything. I have so many moments as a hunter where I wonder, was that little thing actually what resulted in me not getting the shot? Or if I'd done this one small thing different yesterday, could that have changed what happened today? You never know. But I do try to consider the possibilities. And so what you did there, consider, well, that might have been an impact. That might have been the thing. So tell me this then. As you sat there that day and were thinking about, well, shit, was that my sticks or my steps that spooked that doe and then led her to go the other direction? Thinking, is that being a possibility? Would you have done anything differently now? Or do you think you'd try to do something differently next time around in any kind of way with your setup or your gear or something, having the fact that, yes, you've had a deer that winded something down low on a day like that and maybe screwed your opportunity?
I mean, I don't know. I mean, all of our gear, backpacks, sticks, all that stuff, if it was back at the camp, it all stayed outside, like on a deck where it's like a covered deck, but open, on three sides. So it's getting plenty of, breeze all the time, not getting infected with smells from inside. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, what do you do? Carry a bottle of scent away and just spray down your sticks as you put them on the tree?
Probably can't do that. That sounds like even more work than I'm willing to do. But yeah.
I'm happy that like there's like a direct route from camp to this saddle that we had set up in that would have been, 10-minute walk. And instead I did like climbed a ridge, kind of the opposite direction, walked a ridge top and came all the way around. It probably took me 30 to 40 minutes to come in from the downwind side and not come in where I thought the deer were going to be coming to me from. And that seemed to pay off. Because I think had I come through the bottom and straight up into that saddle, like those deer that were there in there later in the morning, they wouldn't have been in there.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, that certainly seems like the right way to go about with that access route, at least. One other thing I do, which, some people will think is over the top, but a lot of things I do are over the top, I guess. I spray vanilla extract. There's a company that makes a stuff called Nose Jammer. You maybe have heard me talk about it, but I do spray a little bit of that on like right by the tree on my first step every time I go up, as just like this little, basically the idea of this stuff is that it's a very strong odor, kind of like the whole cover scent idea. It just kind of overwhelms their olfactory system. And I have seen examples of times when I thought that helped me. And so that is something I do at the base of my tree, just because, that's a spot where there's a lot of human scent pooled at the bottom. Not only do you have your sticks there, but when you're getting set up, to head into or to set up your tree stand or set up your sticks, you maybe had to set your backpack on the ground. You had to set your bow on the ground. You're standing there for a long time as you organize your gear and you get your stuff prepped. So that's that point where there's a lot of potential for contamination. So doing that little spritz of the vanilla maybe has helped me a few times too, and that might be something worth considering. But everyone's got to weigh how much junk do they want to take it with them out there. How much do you want to deal with? But that's something to consider.
I'll definitely have that in my pack next November.
So rewind me a little bit though, because you told me about the first hunt, and now you just told me about the last hunt. Talk me through now, like day 2. It sounds like day 2 you decided to push to another spot on that same oak flat. What else happened after that?
I think I actually hunted the oak flat the next morning. So day 2, I was there at the break of dawn, and I think that's, I don't know, somewhere around day 2 or 3, like the heat was like overwhelming, and we definitely started realizing that it's like the deer were moving like very early and very late. 'Cause I can't remember if that was that morning or if it was the morning after that, but we literally walked in there, red lights going, and there's 2 deer like standing right there on the oak flat, 10 yards from the tree we get up in. And so we basically just, stood there and let them just kind of feed away. They didn't bump out of there. Get into the tree, and just as we're finishing setting up, it's still totally dark. Like a deer walks, definitely within shooting distance right underneath us and kind of goes the same way the other 2 went. And then it got light and nothing, like absolutely just dead. And so I definitely was starting to get the feeling like, man, I gotta zero in on something to like get a little bit closer to them, or find the action. So I don't know which day this was, but I did a loop and found like they had just cut in a new road where they're going to get ready to do some logging, and so the road was fresh and soft. It's like very sandy soil there, and so this road's covered up in deer tracks, and there's like a nice buck track in there. I think I actually sent you the picture of that buck track.
Mm-hmm.
And so I basically just was like, okay, there's a thicket here near this road. It was basically just to the north side of it, and it was pretty big size, like thicket, like just thick young white pines with like interspersed just brambles and whatnot. It seemed like a really good bedding area. And I just went to the downwind side of that and got into the first tree that I could and climbed in there and set up. Nothing popped that night, like 0 deer. At one point, because I was getting a little frustrated of like not seeing enough action, I just decided to, instead of like trying to get somewhere and make a decision, in the dark and just have like a goal, I'm going to actually wait until it gets light and then leave camp and literally go for a walk in the woods until something tells me set up here, whether it's bumping into deer, whole bunch of tracks, fresh scrape activity or whatever. Cause I heard so much over listening to all the podcasts over the months leading up to this about like during the rut, if you're not in the action, then you need to go find the action. Right.
Yeah.
And I kept thinking, man, if I'm not like seeing or hearing these does getting pushed around or seeing bucks looking for these does, like I'm just not in the zone.
Yeah.
So the morning I did that, it actually, as a day as a whole, it worked out good. The morning itself was kind of uneventful, and I think I didn't get into a tree and probably till like, I don't know, at least probably 2 hours after it got daylight. But I got onto a saddle. I mean, I had a rough idea of the path I was going to take, and I get into another saddle, and there's a scrape, and like I can't remember if it was in a leaf or just like in a divot I think it was on a leaf in the scrape, but you could like see fresh piss, on this scrape.
Nice.
Now, sweet. Like this is good, right? Saddle, got a nice scrape, got some fresh piss in it. So got into a tree, had a nice white pine next to me, get in there, and I have a doe come in and bed down like, I don't know, 70, 80 yards from us on kind of the saddle, but just on the lee side of it. And I'm thinking, geez, like this is going to work out, Well, the whole day goes by, nothing, not quite the whole day, but it's getting like mid-afternoon, like no action. And I'm like, all right, we're moving. So I get down. Chris is still in the tree, and no sooner do I put my both feet on the ground. He's like, "There's a buck." I'm like, "Oh my god!" Well, it turned out to be a small buck, but still, like a buck nonetheless.
Yeah.
We let him pass. I'm like, "All right, let's see if something shakes out." The bedded doe had gotten up at some point and just kind of wandered off. So I got back up for another hour. Nothing. We get down, and just the way I decided to go down this ridge is I was going from a saddle to like one of these three-way spots where like a ridge splits kind of. And we get there and it's like fresh rub central. And I'm like, sweet, like this looks good. Like stuff's crossing through here. Get up into a tree, and it's dead until like literally the last 20 minutes of the day, where it's already kind of getting dark and you're starting to like look at your pins going, man, can I make a shot? Mm-hmm. That's when the first buck comes through, and he was like he's definitely kind of a scraggly 8, but at that point I'm like, man, I'm shooting if I get a chance. And he actually stops where I had a shot opportunity, but there was like one just limb that I hadn't cut out during my quick prep. And it's like going right across his body, and I just don't have it. But I get drawn back, and he starts walking again, and just like it's thick, and then there's like a couple shooting lanes, and I try to give him the map sound a few times, and he just keeps on moving. Like he definitely had a plan in his head. The whole encounter lasted like 20 seconds. It was fast. Well, then like 10 minutes later, it's even darker. And literally from the same direction that buck just went, a different buck, just like an 8-pointer, comes almost on the exact same trail. So I'm able to get drawn back as he's coming through like the thick stuff where I didn't have a shot earlier. And I'm hoping for him to pop up like same place that first buck had kind of stopped in an open shooting lane. And for whatever reason, when he pops up, like instead of being at like 30, he's more in that like 40-yard range. And just like nothing I can do about it, I let him go and then grunted at him, and it kind of seemed like he half circled towards me a little bit, but eventually he just faded away. So I felt good about like the way that day played out and the decisions I had made. It was like found sign, set up. Like even though that didn't work out, I moved I only moved like 200 yards between where that scrape was with the fresh piss in it to where all these rubs were on this like ridge intersection was only a couple hundred yards. And, lo and behold, like 2 bucks, came by me. And then like, that's probably where like I started like having, because it sounds like I'm like retelling the story. I'm like, well, geez, sounds like you're having a bunch of action, Yeah. At the moment, you're like, well, we sat all day, and then right at dark, there was like 2 bucks that scurried by. For whatever reason, I never sat that spot again. Was that a mistake?
I mean, it's hard to say, but I guess it depends on what you went on to do later. But if you had a terrain feature, which sounds like a couple of ridges coming together with the fresh sign, and then you saw 2 bucks cruising through at last light, it certainly sounds like something I would try again, especially given the weather. So the big thing I saw during that same week was what you just described, which was 0 activity throughout the heat of the day, and then a bunch of it the last 20 minutes. And so in that case, because the last 20 minutes with that weather is essentially your whole day, it might have been worth trying again because you certainly had some pieces of the puzzle working out there. Why didn't you? Because it was just slower through the rest of the day? Or did you have another plan?
I want to say that was like far enough into the hunt where we basically I hunted 7.5 days. And I want to say we had 4 days of like that miserable heat, hot weather, and then we had a day of rain. And I think that rain was coming on the heels of this, right? And so this is kind of like I was going to do like a what would Mark Kenyon do in this situation. We had a River's Edge pop-up line set up, and there's a room for 2 people. And so it was going to rain enough to where it's like, especially again with cameras, it's like I probably could have made it by myself in a tree and just stuck it out. But with the camera, we're like, you know what? Let's just go and sit and stay dry, and hopefully something will happen. And we had like a small buck pass us by at like 100 yards, and it's just funny. It's like this thing set on like the corner of this cornfield, and we had a camera there, and there's been does, enough does there in that zone where I was like feeling pretty good about it. But that morning, 0. Midday, I think like 3 or 4 does pop out. They go back into the woods, and we kind of see them trickle off up a ridge, which was interesting to me to see like does hit a cornfield at like 2 and then not just stay out there. Like I would have thought they were just going to be out there for the rest of the evening, but instead they actually went back into the woods and then went up a ridge, like up into the big woods. So I don't know. I have no idea why they were doing that. Like, were they going after acorns up there? Like, was there not enough corn in the field? Didn't make sense to me.
Interesting. I would say one thing I would think is that I do see something like this in that deer, they require and desire diversity in what they're going to eat. So throughout that, they're just not going to stick it on one thing forever. They're going to constantly want to get some other options in there. So I'm not surprised entirely that early in the day that they would be bouncing from thing to thing. And with all those oaks like you described, I got to believe that was a big part of what they're eating. But yeah, that is interesting to see them go out there for so little time.
It was cool that rainy day. Unfortunately, it was on the neighbors, and I didn't have permission to hunt over there, but I did get to see out in the rain, kind of late afternoon, like a pretty nice shooter buck tending to a doe, and just very much on lockdown. Like they popped out of like a little thicket that's right off the side of the road. They fed out there for an hour. He was pretty much just watching her, and then they kind of disappeared right back into the thicket. And then I think that was the evening where it finally kind of, the rain chilled out enough where I'm like, you know what? I'm done sitting here. I'm just going to go for a little walk. And kind of went for a walk. And then for the last maybe hour, I basically just stepped off the side of a trail and just kind of stood there, fairly well concealed, thinking that, hey, never know. So, like a deer might just come walking right down this trail that I was walking up, but nothing panned out. So I don't know. We talked about this before we started, is like the reason I probably didn't go back to that spot that had a bunch of fresh rubs and I saw 2 bucks one night is that like I had 400 acres to hunt, and it was almost like I had too much to hunt. And so I'm like, I got to hit it all, got to sit on every ridgetop and the bottom of every bowl one time.
So you just kept pushing into new spots, and after that?
Well, like I said, I did hunt that oak flat like probably 2 evenings and 3 mornings, I think. I can tell you, like, I kept thinking, like, it's weird because you're like in this country, you're like, am I going to hunt on the ridgetop or am I going to hunt in the bottom? Because it doesn't really seem. You told me about this when we were talking about prepping for this hunt this summer, about how like in that hill country, a lot of these bucks like to run like a third of the way down the ridge, right?
Yeah, that's a side hill.
Well, these ridges are almost so steep where it seems like I kept thinking that was going through my mind, and maybe I just wasn't like looking at it right. Maybe I was thinking just like I should have been a third of the way down, like lengthwise on the ridge, like where the ridge goes from high to low a little bit, and set up kind of there where they might kind of like, again, cross the ridge as they're side hilling. But a lot of these ridges, when you're looking at it, if you just go and set up, let's say it's a 300-foot ridge, and you go and set up 100 feet down, like it's so steep that you're going to have like a perfectly perpendicular or parallel to gravity shot to the hillside right next to you. You know what I mean?
Right. Just too steep. Yeah.
It's just like, it just didn't make sense to set up like that. So I kept thinking like, man, the bottoms must be where it's at, because I'm just not seeing the deer moving that much during the day up top. Maybe it's somehow cooler in the bottoms. Maybe that's where there's more just thick bedding cover. But man, every time I went into the bottom, I just felt like I was getting hosed by the wind.
Yeah.
Like I already explained that one setup where I just felt like it was supposed to be blowing south, and I felt like it literally blew north the whole time, and just totally screwed my evening hunt. And then every time I would just pop into these bottoms, it just like I couldn't trust it like I could trust it on a ridge top, and it pulled me to those ridge tops where I'm like, you know what? Even if I'm not seeing as many deer, like if I see one up here, like if it comes where I think it's gonna come, the wind's not going to hose me.
Yeah, and that's pretty consistent both from what I've experienced and then a lot of guys you talk to. Those bottoms are where deer want to be a lot of the time, because that effect you just described, the fact that the wind does pool down there, it swirls down there, they can wind a lot of stuff going on, but really hard to hunt. The only thing I found is sometimes you can find with certain features, there'll be like one wind direction where you will get consistent winds that you can sometimes get away with it. Like there might be a valley with little bowls coming off the side, but that valley runs, let's say, from northeast to southwest. And if you happen to get a wind that blows straight on that angle, it doesn't spin around and you'll get that one consistent. But you have to kind of know that from experience to know those little edges you can cut on days like that. So I don't think you made a bad decision trying to play it safer with the wind. That probably is the better bet 9 times out of 10 in that kind of situation. Did you find yourself, once you got to those last couple days though, wanting to throw caution to the wind, for lack of a better term, and kind of do some Hail Mary stuff like that?
I think what sort of educated the last 2 days, because I think we had the rain day, and then I think I had one full day of like good cool temps, and then I had a half day after that. And I'm trying to think where I started. Oh, I started on the Oak Flat in the morning, and Chris, my camera guy, was like, "We should sit here all day. We should sit here all day." And I'm like, "Nope, it ain't happening." By like 9 or 10, I'm like, "I'm out of here." And again, I had some spots in mind, and we slid down into a saddle that was kind of like a sub ridge. And I get into the saddle, and right as we were kind of entering the saddle, I bumped, I don't know, 3 or 4 does and a buck. Couldn't really tell how big he was. Maybe a shooter, maybe not. But they were just off the side of the saddle, kind of in the bottom. And again, didn't bump real hard. I think they bumped on seeing or hearing us. And that was the other thing, man. It was so dry that those woods were so loud that like it was even hard to tell if you were going to bump anything, because they were going to hear you 100 yards away and they could just sneak away.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But I bumped them, but then I could like still see a doe as she's like kind of doesn't know what's going on. She's feeding. She kind of just walks away. So I'm like, perfect. I'm in the saddle. We're setting up here. Set up, and this saddle was kind of closer to some of this ag than a lot of the other stuff I was hunting. And I set up, and I don't think anything happened that evening. But then the next morning, was the last morning I told you about, where I had like the doe right at first light, and then an hour later I had the buck pushing the doe around, and there was like a small buck in and amongst them too. So that was a day where I was so confident in that spot, and it just looked good because it's just, such a good saddle. And I had like a good thick looking bedding area off to one side of it. I'm like, I'm just leaving the setup, and I'm just going to come back here in the morning and hunt it. And, it paid off. I mean, I definitely got a view of like, a real good buck. He just didn't walk underneath my stand.
Mm-hmm. So what were the questions you had out of the hunt? Like, did you the hunt wrapped up, and did you find yourself like, damn, should I have done this different, or did I do this wrong, or did you head away from it thinking I I just needed more time? Or what was your thought process at that point?
Oh man, all of the above. Certainly could have. I mean, it's so hard to tell too, because it's like you go and hunt the rut, and it's like you have highs that were like almost reaching 70 in November. It's just like not normal. You know what I mean? So it's like it's really hard to like extrapolate much when you're like, oh yeah, remember that? Is like you could hunt it in a t-shirt the whole time, you know?
Mm-hmm.
But you know, I think trying to get more out of my trail cameras would be like, sometimes it's funny, before you start using them, you're like, oh man, it's going to be so easy if you just get trail cameras up everywhere. You'll know that buck is here at 1 p.m., then he's here at 2 p.m., and then there at 3. And if you set up in this tree at 4, he's going to walk underneath you. And it's just not like that.
Never that easy.
The great big buck that we had on camera, we had him only on camera maybe one time during daylight leading up to the season. But during season, meaning he was like running, he was probably the closest buck to where we were sleeping, that we were hunting, like literally sometimes cutting his tracks like less than 200 yards from the camp itself. But we only caught him on camera at night, you know? So it's like, I don't even know if I would have sat on his travel route for 7 days, I don't know if it would have paid off, because I don't even know if that buck moved during the daylight that week, you know, even though it was November 5th through the 12th.
Yeah. Yeah. Trail cameras can only tell you about one little snippet of time. And the other thing is that they only tell you what's, 20 feet in front of you at that one angle. There's a whole lot of space around that camera that these bucks could be passing through and hanging out and spending time and going just 20 yards the other direction, and you would never know it. So they give you this little glimpse, but it is far from all knowing. And I keep finding year after year that the less I depend on them, the better usually. Because when you become too dependent on them, I think your judgment becomes clouded by this like myopic view. Like you're looking at the world through a straw, and you need to look at the world at a much higher level when making these decisions. They should inform you, but if you only let that dictate your strategy, I think you really put yourself in, you're just handicapping yourself if you do that. So it doesn't sound like you did that though. I like the way that you were, looking for sign, trying to find the action, especially given the fact that you didn't really have a ton of historical knowledge about what they were doing at that time of year across a place like this. And, going in relatively blind, I think it was smart that you moved around, keyed in on stuff. One thing I was curious about was just how does factored into your hunting. You were looking for sign, but did you ever find anywhere that had the most consistent doe activity? Because that's the one other thing that, from an outside perspective, I would have said, man, if there was anywhere that had that consistent doe group, bedding or feeding, I would have camped there to a degree too. Because that's the one other thing that in big country like this, if you can find that, it can somehow, tighten what you need to focus on.
The only place that we were seeing it both just through our own eyes and through the camera were kind of on that cornfield edge there. And I probably didn't hunt down there quite as much because we had more of the tree stands that were set up for my dad in that zone. And so I was letting him, hunt those spots a little bit, like that, just that general area more than I was. And again, they were sort of at the bottom and the toe of this hill, and I was just getting so burned by, the wind hunting the bottoms of those hills that I was probably scared a little bit of that. But I can't say, besides that one road that I cut across, and again, it's hard to say there too, because it's like, well, finally you have like this medium that will show you a bunch of tracks because it's not hard or it's not covered in leaves or it's not covered in grass. And you're like, oh my God, there's a bunch of deer tracks. But you wonder if the whole forest floor on all 400 acres looked like this freshly graded, soft, sandy dirt road, you'd probably find that all over the place, right?
Yeah.
So it kind of, you're like, yay, tracks, but then you got to think, you're like, but the country, it's hard to see the tracks because there aren't a lot of places that just show tracks like that. Like I know hunting Doug Duran's, a lot of times you just cut these tracks where they're coming out of the woods and coming out of like corners or, some sort of terrain feature that funnels them and there's a trail that spits them out into a big field. And man, like my kids could walk down there and be like, oh my God, there's a deer trail. You know what I mean? Like you don't have to be Sherlock Holmes. But I feel like in this country, you so rarely get that. It's just those trails you're like, anytime you're on a ridgetop, you're like, sure, there's a deer trail running down the middle of this thing. But like every ridgetop has that. You know what I mean? It's never like you're just like looking at that one muddy trail and you're like, holy cow, look at the deer traveling down this thing. You know, they've got it rutted out. And again, maybe I'm just making excuses and not able to, read the sign properly up there. But I don't know. When it's 6 inches of oak leaves on the ground, how do you find a trail?
They're very, at least from my experience, you're very rarely going to get what you described at Doug's, and you have to just rely on those lightly just seeing where the leaves are kicked up, and then depending on sightings and sign to determine if it is well used. But it sounds like this wasn't a super high deer density area anyways, so you probably weren't going to get to those pounded cow trails no matter what.
No, and we know that, where Doug's area is, right? I mean, it's some of the highest deer density probably in the state of Wisconsin, right?
Yeah. Man, and that's one of the tough things when you get in one of those lower deer density areas where there's the one school of thought like you described, and which some folks in the podcast, talked about, which is if you're not in the action, move to get to it. Yeah. So there's that school of thought. But when you're in these lower deer density areas, there's not a whole lot of action to be had. And sometimes, there won't be any deer action anywhere you hunt for several days, or at least relatively few, until you wait it out. So sometimes it's a matter of finding the spot and knowing that, okay, this has the ingredients I need and it's the right time of year for this spot. If I give it 3 days, eventually something will come through here, but I have to give it that 3 days for that to happen. But it takes a certain amount of comfort and experience in a place to know that. It's really hard to make that guess without having the experience that tells you these kinds of spots are where you need to put the time in. Because sometimes you got to camp, sometimes you got to move. And I dealt with that a lot this year myself, where first I was like, okay, I got to bounce from here to here. I'm going to keep moving. But eventually on the tail end of my rut, on some of my Michigan spots, I realized that you can sometimes get to the point where you're chasing your tail a little bit too much. And if you find those few key places, and if you can hunt it without boogering it up too much, you do need to put in some volume in your few key spots to allow the randomness to finally work into your favor. Walking that line's the trick. That's the tough part, is knowing when to go those two directions, one of those two directions.
Yeah, that buck the first night on the oak flat smelled me like hardcore, right? Like, I mean, he just got a nose full, and 3 bounds later, he was out of my life. I never saw him again up there. Like, when you spook a buck like that and he wins you, even if it is, the middle of the rut, like, should I just have given up on that spot? Because I'm like, you know what? I mean, how many bucks are going to be coming through here? That's the question too. It's like, well, whatever. You just bumped one out of there. There should be at least 2 others that are going to come through here in the next 2 days, right?
Yeah, I would have thought the same thing. Yes, he might be less likely to come through there, but there's other bucks. I would have not felt bad at all about focusing on that. And even with a buck winding you that one time during the rut, if the right lady comes through, I think they'll look past it. I mean, I saw that this year, that I had a buck wind me, and then, hours later, where there was hot doe, and he was right back in the general area because the right doe was there. So, the rut does crazy things. Sometimes you got to put the overthinking glasses aside and just realize that you got to let Mother Nature do its work sometimes too.
Well, I did. That definitely kept me in the woods, and it kept me, thinking optimistically. I don't know if that's a word. Thinking positively.
Yeah.
Being an optimist. It was just that, keep telling yourself it's a rut. It can happen any moment. Just be in the woods and keep sitting still. Be in the woods. Be in the woods.
Would you do anything differently now when you look back and think it through? Are there any clear things? I know that for me, one thing I try to do after a trip or a hunt or a season is I will try to identify just two things, because it's really easy to list off a whole bunch of stuff I did wrong, but then be overwhelmed by all those things and never be able to actually take action on it. But if I narrow it down to the two most important things, then I can actually do something with that and remember it and focus on that. Is there, if you had to pick two things you would do differently or try to do differently this next time, what do you think that would be?
I don't know. I guess, kind of, it's hard. Yeah. I guess one thing would be tree prep, right? For the saddle. Even though you can just move anywhere you want with that saddle. And again, maybe I'm placing too much, sort of negative connotation on having to cut limbs and cut shooting lanes when you get to a spot. But one, it took time where I wasn't hunting, and two, it makes racket, right? Where, if there happens to be something better than 100 yards away, I don't know, are they going to be okay with hearing me saw down 30 to 40 branches and some small trees? I don't know. So I feel maybe what I could have done is instead of just being okay, you got to get in the woods and start hunting, maybe I should have just taken the first day and walk the whole property, which again, some people would be you don't want to do that because you're just going to run your scent all over the place. But walk the whole property, identify some hot scrapes, some hot trails, maybe find that road, earlier in the week that had the, a bunch of tracks on it, and maybe, hunt it at a different time. And maybe just pick out some trees and just spend a day climbing up and down trees and cutting out shooting lanes, and cutting out, just prepping the tree itself to get into it. And that way leave myself in 6 days where, not every setup, but almost every setup you could be I could go in there and know that I'm just going to slip in quietly and get into the tree and be hunting, man, otherwise I could probably have just sat more, I think having the ability to move so much, I never, in those 7.5 days, I never sat one tree dark to dark. I moved every single afternoon. And I think that, like you just said, you gotta give the animals the opportunity to walk underneath you, and every time you get down, and that it happened to me that one day where I couldn't take it any longer and got down at 1 or whatever it was. And sure enough, there's a buck, even though he was a little buck, but it's he could have been a 12 pointer,
Yeah.
So I probably just, 2 or 3 days should have just been you know what? It's as good a spot as any else. Just sit it out, and instead of taking those, because moving trees, even if you just move 200 yards, like I did that day after I had the scrape with the piss in it, even though I only moved 200 yards, it still took a solid 2 hours from my hunting, right? Where I'm out of the tree, I'm walking around, I'm sawing limbs, I'm prepping the next tree. And, you add that up over the course of the week. And if I did that every single day, and I'm guessing, because I thought I would be faster,
Yeah,
it takes time, right? I bet you it was 2 to 3 hours every time I wanted to move. And so you add that up over, a week, and all of a sudden it's I almost burned a day, right? You easily burned an 8-hour day, middle of the day walking around, you know? And I know some guys don't even sit the middle of the day, right? But like, had I been in the tree, I don't know, maybe something else could have walked by me.
Yeah. And you do have, it's what do they call it? There's just basically the tendency to look at what happened and then try to come up with answers for why it happened, when sometimes it's just bad luck too. Like there's this, sometimes you need to like be analyzing what you did and understandably or clearly be able to say, okay, yeah, that was a mistake and this is what happened. But then there's other times like this where what you just described, maybe you should have sat, but in the back of my mind, I'm also thinking, but it was also 75 degrees. Probably wasn't going to be shit moving through there anyways. Now, there could have been, but at the same time, you were dealt a tough hand with the weather during that week, and so much of the activity was pushed to the edges that a little bit was out of your hands there. So, I don't know. When I hear about what you did, it seems like there was a lot of stuff that made sense, but at the same time, there was things where, you know, I think if you had a little more confidence with some of your decisions, you maybe would have stuck it out in places a little longer, and that might have helped you. All that takes time. That's the thing. It's like confirming decisions takes time. It takes like years in these kinds of places to be where I'm at. You know, and some days I'm thinking, man, I just know with these three factors lined up, this is a place that deserves time and attention. Or based off the fact that I saw this happen last week and this week, I know that this is somewhere that I'm willing to sit 8 hours without seeing anything, because I know that if I give it 10, eventually something should. But, you know, 10, 15 years ago or whatever, before spending thousands of hours doing this stuff, I would have been questioning myself the whole time. So I don't know how to, you know, there's really no way to build that up except for just time, seeing it, testing it, and seeing what happens, you know?
Yeah. No, I feel like, you know, my dad actually ended up getting a shot. Unfortunately, he had lost a release, and then was using a release that he hadn't practiced with as his backup. And I think it was much lighter release than his old one. And so he basically touched the arrow off long before, you know, he had even kind of settled his pin, and, you know, had a clean miss. But you know, it was actually the rainy day, and he basically went into a zone where we had been getting some, you know, fairly good activity. And he's like, you know what? That's a place we haven't hunted yet. I'll take my little pop-up blind in there and set up and hunt it. And sure enough, bunch of great rutting activity. And he has a nice 10-pointer come right by him. And unfortunately, he you know, didn't get it. But so yeah, I think, you know, between my dad and I, we got had some pretty close calls, you know, had just a couple things gone a little bit differently, you know, might have gotten to, you know, fling an arrow at or had a dead buck, you know?
Yeah. Do you think that, is there anything you can point to that you feel like you really took away as far as like a learning experience that you can point to as like, man, I'm gonna be better because of that?
Jeez.
Do you think you're a better deer hunter now after this hunt, having experienced all that, you know?
I was going to say, just if there's one thing, it's like the whole thing of just like spending a full week, 7 days, boots on the ground, you know, having to go through all that decision making and pick trees and all that stuff. And just looking at that property, which, you know, I've hunted since I was a little kid, but never through the eyes of a serious bow hunter. And now having done that for 7 days, like, yeah, I've just got like such more an intimate knowledge of the place. It's going to help me, you know, inform decisions that I'll make in the future. Yeah. So I don't know if it's like a better deer hunter, but I think that, I guess you could say that, you know, and hopefully what it gives me out of more than anything is just the confidence to make a decision, right? And be like, yep, that was the right decision. Go with it.
Yeah.
And not be swinging around that tree constantly going, no, should I move?
If it makes you feel any better, well, I just told you that I'm a lot more confident. I still have plenty of days where I'm sitting there wondering, should I move? That still happens to me too.
I know one thing, man. If the wind is not happening, I'm not going to waste my time. Even if I set up and it's just the best spot, because I just don't feel like, sure, if it's kind of off, if you're it's supposed to blow south and it's blowing southwest, sure. I'll stay there. But when it's blowing north and it's supposed to be blowing south, it just is not going to happen. I'm going to have to get out of the tree and do something else. You know?
Yeah. It's a tough pill to swallow, but it's true.
It is. And maybe use that evening to just go and glass the field from the road and see what pops out on the field, and get some information that way.
Yeah. So did you like it? I mean, you went from the deer hunting you've done in the past was like you said, a little different, little gun season type stuff, but now you kind of dove in head first, this full blown bow hunting, a lot of strategy, a lot of puzzle pieces you got to put together. Are you into it?
Totally, man. I love, the older I get, the more that's what I'm drawn to is the hunts that are hard for me. I mean, don't get me wrong. I still love a squirrel hunt because it's casual and just fun and it can be easy at times. Not that squirrel hunting is always easy, but, even though I did kill a bull this year with my bow, but I kind of just have an idea of what to expect when I go out into the elk woods, and I had 4 really hard days of hunting a week ago here to finish out the Montana big game season, but it was tough conditions, and it's I went and hunted, but I know why things happened, right? I have answers for all of it. But I think, like I was saying, I think what draws me towards this and any kind of new hunting I'm doing is that I don't know it, and it's a challenge, and there's a lot to figure out, and there's a lot more to learn, and that gets me excited, and to know that how close we were, this year, to having a dead buck. I got a feeling we're going to be that much closer, next year with what we know now. But you just kind of you got to tighten the noose a little bit. You know what I mean?
Yes.
I feel we had a kind of a medium-sized noose going and never really snugged it up, to really dial in. But yeah.
You got to be careful. You got to be careful, Yanni. It's a slippery slope when you start getting excited about this stuff and getting into the nitty gritty details and strategy. It can grab hold of you fast. So be prepared.
I'm ready, man. I'm ready. I told myself one of my resolutions, and I've already done it since since big game season has ended, is I've shot my bow once this week. And I'm going to shoot that sucker all winter long. I'm not going to have this where turkey season ends and I'm oh my God, I better start shooting my bow.
Yeah.
Because that's kind of where I've been the last 3-4 years. And I want my bow shooting be to the it's I feel it's something I can control much easier.
Yeah. And
it should be the last thing that's on my mind when I'm actually out there hunting is oh, am I going to make a good shot? I want to have that all dialed. I'm going to switch arrows this year. I'm going to the super heavy setup, super high FOC.
Yep.
And I'm going to get that done in the next, month or two and not in the summertime,
I 100% agree with your thought there with it. Not necessarily just the archery thing, but if there's something that is in your control that you can do something about right now, do it. Because in the field out there, that next time you're out there for a week in November, there's going to be so much that's outside of your control. Whatever you can turn, and have dialed now, that's one of those things when you're trying to tighten things down that you can control ahead of time. You gotta try to do that. So
yeah.
Where Yanni, we gotta wrap this up. I
do have kind of one more thing I want to kind of discuss quickly.
Oh, yeah.
If we have time is one thing that I saw on the trail cameras is that, like I was telling you, there was like that. It seemed like it was the last 2 weeks of October where all of a sudden we were like, oh my gosh, like we're going to have some bucks to hunt, like they're here. Like all of a sudden they're showing up, they're hitting those, and they were hitting the scrapes hard. Then it seemed like when we got there, and again, could have been this like crazy hot weather too, right? Like that played a part in it. But like it almost seemed like the buck activity on camera slowed down, and then it picked back up like after what I think most people would consider like peak rut, like sort of somewhere middle of November, or I'm trying to think, I left on the 12th, but like, so after that, towards the end of November, it sort of picked back up. And I saw I caught 2 bucks that we had never seen yet on camera, like completely new bucks. And so I'm like wondering like what my dates are going to be next year.
There's
I go still for first week of November, or do I maybe slide in 2, 3, 4 days of October and then hunt into the first 4 days of November?
I always look at the first 2 weeks as being your safest bet. The first week or two in November is just safe. But if you get a weather front like what we had come through, it can really change things and make things more difficult. So, I mean, like in your situation where you have to lock down the dates way ahead of time, you're kind of SOL. I would still err towards somewhere in that range just because it's just hard to beat it year in and year out if you had to average things out. But, hunting pressure could have impacted you a little bit, right? I mean, once you start being around there and you walking around and your dad walking around, all that stuff, like that could be part of the reason why things slowed a little bit. Of course, the weather slowed things. Who knows what else is going around there? I wouldn't read into it too much given those factors, is I guess what I'm trying to tell you. At the same time, though, you can start to get to know property. And like in my case, I've got a spot that always is better early. I've hunted it for over a decade now. And I have found that for whatever reason, there's some does that come into heat, early, consistently. There's always a hot doe, that last week in October. So peak rut type stuff starts happening for me the 26th, 27th, 28th around there. And so I hunt that week just as if I was hunting November 5th. But it's taken me time to figure that out. And there's no other way to find it other than that kind of thing. So always something more to learn, Yanni. Always something more to learn.
Man, but that's what makes it fun.
It does. That's for me, that's what I love about it. Like you said, it's the challenge. It's this puzzle. It's chess and poker and checkers all mixed in one. And I geek out about the never ending process. So, it brings a smile to my face knowing that I've got a kindred spirit over there in Montana right now. And I think we just got to figure out a way to share the whitetail woods together here soon and do something. Get a hunting on the books.
I'm in, man. I'll we'll end this and get on the phone and start planning.
I like it. Where can people see this hunt, Janis? Where's this all going to be and when?
This will be a MeatEater Hunts episode, which will air on the MeatEater YouTube channel. And I believe now they're talking April time frame-ish. And I'm going to have 6 episodes coming out. And I can't tell you which one this one's going to be. But, start looking for it late March. And keep an eye out for it through April. And then if you still haven't seen it, maybe in the first 2 weeks of May. But, MeatEater YouTube channel, MeatEater Hunts.
Awesome. I'm looking forward to checking it out. Yanni, thank you for taking the time to walk us through all this stuff. I still feel like there's 15 other things I wanted to ask you about, but like we talked about, we always go longer than the planned time, and we already have. So maybe you ought to come out this spring or summer to the property, and we can go do a tour, and then we can sit down and do a podcast after we walk the property, and you can give me your feedback. Sign me up. I like that idea. That sounds like fun. All right, Janis, thank you, and let's figure out that spring trip soon.
Sounds good. Thanks again, Mark.
All right, that's a wrap. Hope you enjoyed Janis' story. I hope that maybe some of the things we talked on the front end were able to help kind of color some of this conversation for you and left you with some different things to think about now that we're wrapped up. If you can do some of that homework I mentioned, hit me up on Instagram, leave a comment on Facebook or Insta, and let me know some of the things that you took away either from this podcast or from your own hunts after you were able to do a little bit of that decision analysis or learning. So thank you all for tuning in. Thanks for riding along with me as I go down these crazy rabbit holes. But I hope, and really what I think this podcast has the most opportunity to do, not just this episode, but in general, right? I want to make the Wired Hunt podcast be a place where those of us with a similar passion can get together and have a good time, but also where we can push ourselves and push each other to take that next step. And I think this type of exercise is a way to do that. So if you're game for it, give it a shot. Think about these things. Let me know what you're thinking. And until next time, stay wired to hunt.
I'm sure a lot of you guys remember the old ceremonial hunting tradition of eating the heart out of the first animal you kill. Meat from those organs are among the most nutrient-rich foods on the planet. You can get those same benefits your ancestors craved via convenient daily capsules from Heart and Soil. Find out more at heartandsoil.co. And remember, use code MeatEater for 10% off your purchase.